All right, so my name is Mark Osterveld. I've been at Oanda for just about 6 years in about 2 weeks. And Jerome?
Hi, I'm Jerome, front-end developer, and I've been at Oanda for 8 years exactly today. This is my anniversary. Anyway, okay.
So have any of you heard of Oanda? Do you know what Oanda does? Anybody? One person? Two people? Three? Okay. So Oanda is a foreign exchange market maker. So most people, when you think foreign exchange, you think you're at the airport and you're going to the States and you need to change some Canadian dollars into American dollars and you're going to get ripped off. And that's not at all what we do. What we are is more for people who are investing. So people will deposit money with us and then they'll make investments and they'll try to make some money as the prices fluctuate between the various currencies. We have a little video here from the 1983 movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy that very much explains kind of how it works. In here they talk about pork bellies and wheat, but just when they're talking about that, think about euro and yen and stuff like that.
Oh, William, my boy, right on time. Come in, come in. Sit down.
No thanks, guys. I already had breakfast this morning.
This is not a meal, Valentine. We are here to try to explain to you what it is we do here.
We are commodities brokers, William. Now, what are commodities? Commodities are agricultural products, like coffee that you had for breakfast, wheat, which is used to make bread, pork bellies, which is used to make bacon, which you might find in a bacon and lettuce and tomato sandwich. And then there are other commodities like frozen orange juice and gold. Though, of course, gold doesn't grow on trees like oranges. Clear so far? Yeah. Good, William. Now, some of our clients are speculating that the price of gold will rise in the future, and we have other clients who are speculating that the price of gold is going to fall. They place their orders with us, and we buy or sell their gold for them.
Tell them the good part.
The good part, William, is that no matter whether our clients make money or lose money, Duke and Duke get the commissions.
Well, what do you think, Valentine?
Sounds to me like you guys are a couple of bookies.
I told you he'd understand.
And whenever we take too big of a risk, like too many people say that euro is going up versus gold, then we take that risk and we place an order with a larger bank, and we try to have no risk. So Oanda currently has, I'll let Jerome take this.
The first one that's running 65% of our trading volume was developed in 2001 and didn't anything over that. So you have to imagine back then the requirement is that you should be able to trade from any computer and you should be able to trade from any computer without installing anything. So say we are at the airport, you want to do your flights, there's a computer there, you want to pull the trade, you should be able to do that. So that's why this is the design of the Java outlet. Over the time, if you have storage sticks and next step right there, or the whole stick with the Yeoman design virtual machine over the Fast forward to today, Sass, is a standalone install, so it's sometimes difficult for.
So Java's taking a real beating. They'll release a new version of Java. There'll be exploits. Homeland Security came out and said, don't use Java. So while we still maintain and use the Java GUI, we're hoping to move away from it.
So today, now that smartphone are ubiquitous, we have a nice one on Android version.
They represent a quarter to a third of our trading volume. Came at the back, excellent. Okay. There are still traders that like their heavy client installed on Windows, so we do support MetaTrader 4, which is like a trading interface a trading system that goes on that plugs into different market brokers like us.
We use that old multi-document interface. If any of you remember how painful that was, but people still love it.
And from our Forex lab, we have FX Trade now, which we started as a Google extension and now as Chrome extension, sorry, and now it's become a booklet. So it is HTML5 CSS. However, it will not render properly on mobile devices. And we have a couple of APIs for people who wants to code and interface with us directly. Okay. So yeah, go ahead.
So our goal was to generate a next generation, or to create a next generation trading app based around modern standards, modern browsers, meant to work on mobile devices, on tablets, on desktop computers, laptops, on your TV, on future devices. It was meant to be future-proof, or as future-proof as we can make it. So the team that was going to build this was myself and Jerome, 2 full-time developers. And then every 4 months, we were getting a new crop of co-ops coming in, mostly from Waterloo, although we occasionally have some from U of T. We have one right here from Waterloo.
So it means with the people going in and out of the team, the tools we pick and the methodology needs to be easy to pick up for these people that keep coming in and leading the team.
So our goals were to build an HTML5 single-page application, as I said, so that it can work, so that it can basically be future-proof, work on all devices from the smallest up to the largest. Mobile first, responsive design, a couple nice buzzwords that people like to throw around. But again, that's all part of being future-proof. We didn't want to do any new back-end development if we could avoid it. We wanted to try to leverage existing systems that were there, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. So we could just concentrate on the front end. We wanted to do behavior-driven development. Both of us had toyed with it before on other projects and never really had the opportunity to really see it through, because when you have a lot of legacy code, it's really hard to bring that up to speed. But since this was a greenfield project, this was a project that was starting totally from scratch, we had the luxury of trying it out. Because we were going to be swapping in part of our team every couple of months, and to ease new team members coming in, and as part of making sure we write better code, we wanted to do code reviews. And we wanted to be able to do continuous integration and deployment. There's no point in having tests if you don't run the tests all the time. So we wanted to make sure that every time a commit was pushed to our repos, that the tests were run, we would get a response, a light would flash if something was broken. And we wanted to be able to instantly deploy those changes somewhere where our stakeholders could see what was happening. They could tell the progress of the project. They could give us feedback. So the existing assets that we had to try to accomplish this, we had a couple of trading APIs available to us. We have a Java-based trading API that some of our customers use, and that our Java-based API, or Java trading GUI uses, sorry. We have a FIX API, if anybody knows the FIX protocol. It's a financial trading protocol that a lot of banks and that use for doing trading. We had a legacy REST API, a closed REST API that the iPhone and Android use and that the Trade Now uses. And we have a new open REST API that we're going to be releasing in 2 weeks. If you go to developer.oenda.com, you can get some information about it. You can sign up. You can write apps for it. Originally, we had planned on using that, but the timeline of when they're releasing versus when we're trying to release didn't work, so we ended up going back to the legacy, the closed REST API. You'll see some of the techniques that we used here with the test-driven development and the modularization of the code. When we switched from the new API back to the old API, it was a lot less painful than it would have been if we hadn't had that foresight. So we had Git already set up company-wide for managing our code base, our repos. We had Garrett set up for doing code reviews. And we had Jenkins set up for doing continuous integration and deployment. So we had these things to help us.
At the beginning of the year, this is where the project started. We basically 4 days to decide on everything, technology, workflow, design, everything before our co-op starts. Because, you know, co-ops, they're hardworking and they're eager, and they're also hardworking and eager, which means if you don't have anything planned, they're going to be on your back saying, what do I do next? What do I do next? Give me something to do. So 4 days to plan everything, that's not a lot. And then we came across, so we did some research, and we did come across this talk, this article on Smash Magazines, which is a curated list of talks that helps you become a better front-end engineer.
So one of our managers sent us this, and we're not sure if we take it as a hint or not that we need to be improved. But.
And there's plenty of good tools there. The problem is there's a lot of good tools. So which one do you pick? And this is where we found having some opinionated tools helps you make a decision quickly because they have a way of being used, and if either you agree with this way or you don't, and so you love them, you hate them, but it's an instant decision, and this is how you can decide and get a tool or not. So the first one we got was Yeoman. And the first thing you need to know about Yeoman is you can't say Yeoman without mentioning these two guys, Paul Irish and Adi Osmani. They're a Google Chrome advocate, which means they go from conferences to conferences and advocate best practices on HTML5 and CSS and whatnot. They put this tool together.
Right. So what Yeoman does is it gives you project scaffolding. So a lot of languages these days, like Ruby and tools like Maven, give you project scaffolding. So you want to start a project, you just run this tool, and it gives you a bunch of files, so you don't have to figure that out for yourself. And this is a good tool for front-end development. So it uses somebody else has already made the decision of what tools to use and took them all together and configured them for you. And not only the best tools, but the best practices for how to use those tools. You can have the best tools in the world, but if you don't use them properly, you're not going anywhere. All right, so demo time. So what we're doing here is, so Yeoman is a Node module. Has anybody used Node, Node.js? NP? Command plus. All right. So Yeoman is a package that comes from Node.js, and you install it with npm. And once you've got it installed, you just run yo, and it puts this nice little graphic of the Yeoman guy, and asks you some questions. So one of the first questions it asks you, so we've got a couple generators installed here. One of the first questions it asks you is to install a generator. So let's select that. And so it asks what kind of generator we want to search for. So say we want to do some Angular development. So here's a bunch of generators that it's got for doing Angular. If we search again for Backbone, there's a couple generators for Backbone. Now you notice the one that we already have installed doesn't list, it only lists the new ones. So once you've picked one of those and installed it, So get me out of here, I guess. Oh, yeah, sorry, run it. I didn't see that. Yeah. All right. So, wait, sorry, did you put the, okay. So, the backbone generator by default is configured to use, I forget which package for templates, but we want to use handlebars. So one of the command, you need to know the I need to learn how to speak. You need to remember to type in the command line option, template format, template framework, sorry. Where you can find this is if you go to GitHub and you search for these, they all have GitHub pages so you can see what the command lines are. So this is going to ask a couple questions. It's asking whether or not we want to run Bootstrap or Sass. In our case, we don't. And whether or not we want to use RequireJS. In our case, we do. So we run this, and Control-C that. So what it does is it creates a bunch of files. It creates some files for Git, so it sets up your Git ignores for you. It sets up Bower. Bower is another tool that we'll talk about in another slide. It sets up your JS hint file. It sets up your editor config file. Editor config is really cool if you have different people on your team who like using different editors. Jerome, for example, likes to use Vim, and I prefer to use Sublime Text. And if you don't have your editors set up the same way, like for your tab spaces or your new line characters, it can really make a mess in your Git repo. So something like editor config is a plugin that you can have set up in both. You edit your editor settings in one place, and then you both have the same settings. So when you're looking at your Git history, it all looks the same. It creates the Grunt file. We'll get to Grunt soon. Package.json, which is your node modules that it needs. And then it creates a demo app with a style sheet and an icon. And it creates a Mocha test framework and a sample test.
You have no excuse not to start running tests. It's already set.
So, and then what it does, we aborted it because it's going to go out in the network and fetch all the pieces that it needs. But that's going to take about 10 minutes, so we don't need to do that right now. We have it in another directory already checked out.
If you want to look like a hacker or somebody that's doing a lot of work, just set this to run or install with another window at the top, and you're good to go for at least 10 minutes.
So where's the, go back to the code. Oh, sorry. Oh, no, sorry. All right. All right. So Grunt is one of the tools that it installs. So what Grunt gives you, Grunt is JavaScript's response to make files. So it's like your Ant file or your Maven file. It's for creating your build rules. And it's just another JavaScript file. If you want to use Coffeescript, you can rewrite it in Coffeescript as well. So you don't have to do this context switch between your build system and your code when you're trying to do things. You can still just keep everything in JavaScript. It's very easy to extend, again, because it's JavaScript, it's all right there. The source is all in GitHub. There are a lot of modules available. Generally, if there's something you want to do with it, somebody else has already done it, and you can find it on GitHub.
Yes, okay. So what you get once you run the Yeoman generator is you get like a great build process. Typically, so you'd have one command that's going to compile your Coffeescript files into JavaScript files. It's going to compile your Sass files into CSS files. Then it's going to combine all the JavaScript together, minify that. It's going to optimize your images. Like plenty of good practices that once you're about to release, you think, oh, maybe I should do that. Let's spend some time finding the tools and plugging all that together. That's already set up for you. As we mentioned with Mocha, you have the entire unit testing framework that's already set up, so you can just start writing tests. You don't have to set that up, which usually is painful, so you don't do it, so you don't write tests, you get burned.
You can just go to the command line, and anytime Grunt test, all your tests get running, you get, within a few seconds, you got the output there saying your test passed or failed.
And we'll show you that in a moment. You also get a preview server, so If you develop locally, you don't need to either copy your files somewhere else or install Apache or Nginx in another directory and then start adding configuration files over there that refers to your source code over here. Everything runs from your Git repo. It's pretty well contained. And the parts that's really awesome and magical is the live reload capabilities as you change code and you change style sheets. And we're going to and change tests, yes. So we're going to try to demo this.
So this is the default app that it comes with. It basically just an HTML page saying, oh, you've got me installed and these are the pieces you've installed. So if Jerome brings up the editor, can you make it not full screen? Yeah. So Jerome's going to bring up the editor here and he's going to make a change to the HTML and save it, and you'll see the change almost instantly. So that's a neat little trick that we learned in Chrome to, especially if you're playing with media queries and you want to resize your browser, but you don't want to grab the edge of it. You can just do that with your the web inspector. So we didn't have to reload the page. We didn't have to run the build again. It just happened instantly. You can do the same thing in JavaScript. Oh, so he's just adding an alert here just so that something gets in our face so that we know that it happens. We just did the save, boom, it pops up. So you can do the same thing with CSS, although this part of the demo is broken right now, but you'll see that a little later on. Ah.
I'm feeling like
you're feeling like, okay. So go to the CSS file. Single click. Oh, excellent. And you notice it didn't rerun the JavaScript. It reloaded the CSS, but it didn't refresh the page. It just reloaded the CSS. So this for us was magical. We're going to be so much faster now. It's just seeing that instant response was amazing. So Bower is another tool that comes with Yeoman by default. And Bower is, can you go to the Bower? Bower is package management for the web. It's like NPM, but for client-side packages. NPM is the node package manager. So you use that for server-side JavaScript packages. It's like apt-get install, or it's like on Windows there's something called Chocolatey. It's just a command line tool for installing libraries that you're going to need.
And so instead of creating like 5 different websites for the 5 different libraries that you use and checking the database and whatnot, you have one command to run to either you have one command to run, either Bower install your application or your library, or Bower update, and it will scan the net or like the central repository for you and grab you any updates if they are available. So it's a time saver.
It also manages any dependencies. So I need Backbone, but Backbone needs underscore. You don't have to worry about getting it. It grabs it for you. So the week was done. We decided what we wanted to do. The co-op started, and we decided to set up a group coding session. Oh, there's more slides here. So we decided to set up a group coding session, basically kind of like pair programming, but with the 4 of us. So it's one person at the keyboard and everybody sitting around. And the point of it was to lay out our core classes so that we all understood what it was going to be and we all thought about it and talked about it. And to get familiar with BDD and Coffeescript. So we decided to use Coffeescript in this project for a couple of reasons, which I think are in right here. So we decided to use Coffeescript because Jerome and I both come from a background of compiled languages. And having that compiled languages just gave us that extra little bit of safety net. Plus, it was a really cool thing that we wanted to try. Coffeescript is essentially just JavaScript, only the best parts. It has, as I said, the safety of a compiled language. Demo time again. Right. So Coffeescript has a great website where they document their language. They show you all the features of the language, but they have a really awesome little thing right there in the middle. See where it says try Coffeescript? So you go there and they have this live editor. And Jerome's going to do a little bit of live editing here to show you some examples of what happens in Coffeescript. I can talk you through if you, all right. Right. So the first thing you see here is that the alert in JavaScript has the parentheses and the semicolon. With Coffeescript, it won't even let you put in semicolons, and you can avoid the parentheses. Project. Oh no, bigger. Okay. Woohoo! All right. All right. So that's a real simple thing. And then, so what we're doing here is a one-liner. Just this, if you're familiar with Perl, I'm sorry, not Perl, Python or some of those languages, you're used to doing things like this. Maybe Perl too. That just makes your code a little more readable sometimes and a little faster to write. So here's how you create an array in Coffeescript. You can do it over multiple lines. Notice that once it's over multiple lines, you don't need the commas. You can put them in if you want, but you don't need them. So
that generates the default for you. You pretty much, like, the only reason you have an index, you usually have an index in a for loop is so you can access one element of your array. So pretty much it's you don't have to worry about the index itself. So here for every value in the array, I'm going to sum that up to I and get a nice value at the end. What else? Objects. So objects, pretty much as soon as you start lining up like key value pairs like this, and I need to scroll up.
So Coffeescript is a language where indentation is important. So this is where you need to make sure that you have your editor set up properly, so that if you mix tabs and spaces, then it's going to get confused. It's going to give you compile errors. And at first, you're going to go, what the hell is going on? Why am I getting this unexpected indent error? But whenever you see that unexpected indent, it's because you've probably mixed up tabs and spaces. Or somebody else has their editor set differently than you, and that's why you need to use something like editor config.
So you can also iterate over the key and value of an object. So this is for a key value of an object, and then maybe do something with some. I'm going to concatenate everything with this thing.
So he's iterating over the key and value of an object. Again, it looks very similar to the loop that he did for the array. And then, so this is the neat thing where you can build strings real easily. If you kind of almost like a little templating language, everything in beside the hash curly braces becomes a variable. And this, you see all that one line code ends up being those 4 or 5 lines over there.
You can also do a line list comprehension like in Python, meaning that, so I'm going to do this for every key value pair in my object, but those strings are not going to go anywhere. But if I put parentheses around, this is going to return me an array, pretty much. If I'm not mistaken, yeah.
Yeah. So.
And then we could show, say, the first element to that, or the second element to that array, run it, Coffeescript below, and then equal to good nodes.
Cool. So one of the things that bit me a lot when I first writing JavaScript on the client side was the this operator, or the this member. I always got lost as to when I needed to bind and what this meant. So Coffeescript has a nice little shortcut that really helps with that. So first of all, sorry, we're making a class here. Sorry, I jumped ahead. So the first thing we're doing is we're making a class. So in JavaScript, there's a lot of ways that you can make a class. Coffeescript formalized it and said, this is the way, if you're going to make a class, this is the way you do it in our language. So the function in Coffeescript is the arrow there with the dash and the greater than symbol. And that you put that instead of putting the word function. If it has parameters, you put them in brackets like that, like this. So in CoffeeScript, at refers to this. So what we're doing here is the constructor is taking a bid and it's setting it to this dot bid. There's another neat little shortcut that you can do, which I'm just going to show you in a second. Is you can just get rid of those lines and just put at in front of the parameter. Right. So now back to what I was saying about getting lost as to what this means. So especially when you're doing a click handler and you want to, that's when you usually run into the problem. So instead of using the skinny arrow or the arrow with a single dash, you use a fat arrow, which is an equal sign, and the so what this does is it ends up creating the bind for you. It ends up creating a closure so that the this that you want is the this that you really want. It just is. A lot of times when we're writing tests or writing code and something's not behaving the way we want, we just end up changing it to a fat arrow and everything works properly.
So click streamer, this is not through the window, it's your instance of array like you would expect. That concludes the CoffeeScript primer.
So back to the slides. All right, so behavior-driven development. So behavior-driven development is basically just test-driven development with an attitude about how you write your tests. First question for everybody. Why does a car have brakes? Anybody? So you can drive fast. If you don't have brakes, you're going to drive really, really slow so that you don't crash into things.
If you drive fast without brakes, you'll crash into things, so then you'll drive slower. Oops. So really, BDD and brakes are your ticket to the fast line. If you don't have tests and you develop fast, you're going to end up breaking something on production one day or another. Then your other alternatives is to develop slowly, measure any single change you make, and weigh the consequences. And then your project is months behind. Because you have like a test suite that you can run on every commit and you're writing tests first, you can do awesome things like this. And you'll never get burned on production.
Well, less often. So BDD is test-driven development, business-driven development, speech lessons. Business-driven development is actually very easy. There's one rule and one rule only. You don't write any code until you've written some tests.
And so when you run Yeoman and scaffold your project, you get Mocha, Chai already set up for you. So these are the URLs where you can get them. And we found that Sinon or SinonJS, we're not quite sure how to pronounce it really, is also a great Swiss Army knife for stubbing, mocking, and doing all these types of things.
So one of the key things you need to do when you're writing tests is some sort of inversion of control or dependency injection. And to do that really well, you want to only worry about the code you're testing, and for everything else, try to kind of write a stub or a mock to take care of that. And we'll get into some examples of that.
So another thing we found, we read somewhere and we applied it and it really works. So you want to organize a test following 4 different things. You arrange your data, then you act on it, and once your code is in a certain state, you can make as many assertions as you want. And if you've done things like stubbing Ajax, you probably want to clean up after yourself so that your other tests don't break.
So this is an example of what a test looks like in Mocha. So it starts with the describe line, describe what you're testing. So again, talking about BDD, what you want your test to be is kind of a documentation for your code, because none of us like to write documentation. But what you want is your new developers to come in and be able to look at your test and, oh, that's what that class is supposed to do. You describe the behavior of the test. If you're doing test-driven development, you're saying, when I call this method with this parameter, I expect to get this back. But really, in the end, that's not what you care about. What you care about is when this happens, this other thing happens. You want to describe the behavior of what's happening. So here you start with the describe statement, and then the before statement is stuff that runs before your tests run, and at the end of the before statement is when we actually run the code that we want to test happens. And then in the it statements, that we're testing that we got the output that we expected, or we got the results that we expected.
And I guess a couple of lessons. There are also before each, so something that's going to run before any iteration test you put in. Don't use that. The reason why is it ends up running before any test, so you end up with like a before each that becomes, okay, this is the state for that test, and this state for this test, and this state for that test. The arranged part becomes like bloated and very hard to maintain, whereas you can actually nest describes within another describe, and that should be like, you can imagine we have like multiple levels of describe, and this is your lower, like this is one unit of test, and it's pretty well isolated. Like this is only what it needs, and nothing else what has been done after will matter.
So one thing that we found is to try to only test one thing inside each it. We might get to that a little bit later. But the goal of that is that when a test fails, you see, okay, this test failed, but if you're testing 6 different things in there, you don't know why it failed. And we started putting all these, asserts inside our its and being all happy about it, and then the test would fail and it would take us forever to debug it. And then once we started, only having one single test per it, we could see exactly where the test failed and understand exactly why it failed, and fix it a lot faster.
So it and describes comes from Mocha, and like Chai gives you this really English-looking sentence, like, account something something should equal. There's another way where you can say expect account name to equal primary. It really reads like English, and it's a departure from assert, which is really more like computer-oriented.
So, RequireJS. So, anybody who's written any kind of a web app, after a while you find you've got 16 JavaScript files you're including, and you have to get the order just right, and then this starts depending on this, so you have to rearrange it, and it just becomes a nightmare to manage. So, what RequireJS does is it gives you asynchronous module definition, where you say in the module, I depend on this module and this module, and it worries about the order that they get loaded. It makes sure you have everything that you need. It just saved, once we switched to using that after about the 3rd week, it just saved us so much time every time we added a new piece of code. One of the great things about that is with the Grunt file that Yeoman created for us, it's already built in there to combine all those files together and minify them and compact them so they load fast at runtime, but yet are still easy to debug at build time.
So the way it looks is the only thing you include now is RequireJS, and you put this data main nugget or attribute that tell RequireJS which is the main file that starts your application. In your main file, then you do something like this. You do require. You're going to say, well, to start my app, I really need this class or this library. You list the dependencies in the array. And then you guarantee that once they're loaded, the function that you pass after that will trigger. And then you're ready to go and instantiate your app. And within the class itself, define is where, again, you're going to list your dependencies and say, well, for account details to really work, I really need an account model to do it first. So you specify this, and again, you pass a callback that once the account model is loaded, will trigger and execute.
Okay. All right. So the last piece we need to go over before we get back to the code is Backbone. So Backbone is a simple model view controller. So ideal for client-side single page application, which is what we wanted to build. Jerome and I both had prior experience using that in other projects, so we were very comfortable with it. With all the new things that we were introducing for this project, we wanted at least one thing we'd done before. All right, demo time. So this is about a century ago, we said we were going to do some group coding. We're finally back to it. Get bigger. Command +++.
I think this one is on.
So the first thing that we did here was we added a new task to Grunt called server test. so that we could actually see our tests in the browser. So there's the app running. And did you restart it? Grunt server test. All right. So and then you can see here the test running. So this is the test that came with Yeoman when we ran the generator. So it really doesn't do anything, but it's just to show you how it works.
The reason we did that again is you have two modes. You either do Grunt server, which runs your app, or Grunt test, which runs your test in a command line. It's kind of useful to see both at the same time. So we just made sure that. Do you want to go over the code?
Sure. So Jerome will bring up the file that we modified, and we can show you what we did. We just added the Grunt server, Grunt file JS towards the end of the file.
Is that big enough?
Can you read those colors, everybody? All right. So basically, anyway, we just added another task here, a task definition if target equals test, and that's all we had to do. And now we can, with a couple of the config changes higher up in the file, which we don't need to go into. We'll put all this stuff on GitHub later, so people can grab it if they want. So the next thing we did was. So now there's the four of us sitting in a room figuring out what we're going to do. And as we said, we want to start out by writing tests. We wrote a test plan for the instrument model. So if we load up this page, so there's our test plan. So there are no tests. There are no actual tests defined there. So if you bring up the instruments.coffee file, you'll see that all we've done is describe what the tests are going to be. Just going to put so again. You'll see that this test doesn't really do a whole lot. It basically describes what's going to be in the model. But as I said, your tests are meant to be sort of documentation of the code, documentation of what the model is supposed to do. So if we go to the next commit, so here in this one we've actually defined the tests. So what we should see now is some failing tests. So if you go to the console, you'll see that there's an error. So the tests are failing because instrument model hasn't been defined yet. So if you go to the code for the test, so what you see the test now, we set up Mocha, we set up Chai. We have our arrange section over here. I'll just run in front of the screen. We have our arrange section here, over here, where we create the model and we pass, and this is the data that would be coming back from the API. And then these are our tests. So we expect that the model will have an ID, and the ID will equal the EuroUSD. The model will have a display name, and it'll equal that. And this is what I was talking about before, about just having one assert per it. So that if this one fails, we know that it's the precision that's wrong, and it's much easier to debug.
So I guess obviously we've written the test, but we don't even have the model class. The file doesn't exist. That's the reason why it's not loaded.
So if we go to the next piece of code, so they won't be this fine-grained all the way through. This is just to get started. Oh, I think we changed the Grunt file, so you might have to restart Grunt on that one. All right, so you see 5 of the tests have passed. And we show the code. 5 of the tests have passed. 5 of the, can't speak today. 5 of the tests have passed. And all we did in the code was we created a backbone model. So most of the work's already been done for us. But if we go back to the test, we see that one of the tests is failing, and that's where we expected it to have an ID. And that ID hasn't got set. So if you see the test open there, you see that that one test is failing. So for those other things, we don't have to write a lick of code. So one of the things that, by writing the test first, we've realized just how little code we have to write to make this pass. And we're only going to write as much code as we need to make the test pass. One thing that BDD or TDD forces you to do is understand the problem before you try to solve it. So you only write as little code as you need. So grab the next checkout. Oh, okay. All right. So now the test is passed. And if you see the code, All we've changed is we've added this. So Backbone models already have a way for us to define which of our members we want to be the ID. So now we had a model, so now we want to create a collection. So the next thing we did was create some tests for an instrument collection.
Mention, we're trying to build a very simple app that lists all the rates that are available in our system and show the rates of the update as updates come up.
So basically what we're going through here is what we did in the first week or so, just to get up to speed, to learn all the tools, to get our co-ops up to speed. So, right, so if we see, what we've done now is we've added a test for the instrument collection. And again, all the test really is that the instrument collection should contain instrument models. So, and the test is originally failing because we haven't created the instrument collection yet, so the next thing has the instrument collection. And so now the code is, I think you need to so the watch task in Grunt is really good except when you introduce new files. And for that, it doesn't always notice them. So sometimes you have to restart Grunt if you've introduced a new file. It'll see changes in that file, but it doesn't seem to watch the directory quite as actively. So now you see that this test is failing because it's getting the member out of the collection, but it's not of the right instance that we expected it to be. So if you show the code that we wrote there, single click. So all we had to do to create the collection was this. So if we check out the next one, you'll see what we did to make that test pass. So now now the test is passing, and if we go back to the code, all we did was we added a definition of what model we want. Any things passed into it to be newed as or created as. Right. So the next thing we wanted to do was create a view, I think. Oh, the API, right, sorry. So the next thing we did was create some API code to talk to our backend server and fetch some data. So console over here. All right, so we've created the test, but we haven't created the API yet. So if we take a look at the test, so this is where we started using sign-on. And we use sign-on to stub out the AJAX calls. And what we do is whenever we see a sign-on AJAX call, we just create a promise, a deferred, and because that's the way that the behind the scenes that AJAX is creating the call, it's creating a promise and returning the data back that way. So we created a stub here using sign-on, and so the first thing that we need to do is log in. So given a valid username, password, and an API key. So here we create the API and we pass in the API key. Here we create the stub, and when it get the so what Jerome has just done now is check out the code with the API. You need to restart Grunt. Because it's stupid, it doesn't notice new files. So now you see all the API tests have run, and if you take a look at the code, so in the API we've got our AJAX calls where it grabs the data and parses it. And if you look back at the tests, what we've done in there is, so this is, scroll down. So this is what the data that looks like when it's comes back from the API. So if there was an error, you see this. Scroll down. When you do the fetch instruments, this is what the data looks like coming back. Okay, so now we've got the API. So now I think we create a view. So first thing we did again was implement some view tests, and it's failing because we haven't created the views. You can see the view tests. There's not a whole lot in them. And then so check out the views now.
So we're assuming that once we fetch the data, we're going to have a collection of instruments, each containing an instrument model containing prices for one particular pair, Euro USD. We're going to have a list view that's going to be tied to the collection and display the entire collection. And for each model inside the collection, we're going to have an item view that will represent, that will be the market for one and one only element.
Okay, so now we should see that. So those tests are running now. One of them is failing, and we couldn't debug it before now, but it's something about a string match. But we'll save solving that later. So here is the app running. It's not pretty, but you'll see that what it's done. Can you make it bigger? Command plus. It's gone to the server, and it's grabbed a list of instruments that we have. There's 93, I think, that are coming back to this account. And you see every second it's pulling for rates, and you see the rates are updating.
And the weird thing is, until now, our app was really nothing. We had like a test suite. At the point where we ended up with the collection and the API, we had a test suite. We have some code that passed the test suite, but we had no app. And after a week, it feels kind of weird. You're like, am I wasting some time, or am I doing something useful? So once you start tapping into the views, this is where your app becomes graphical, and you feel that you were really on the right track.
So bring up the main.coffee so you can see really there's not a whole lot of code in the app. Everything else that we've written is tested. It was written in test. All we do in the app is we create the API. So forget that API key. We log in. We forget that password. This is the practice server, so it doesn't matter anyway. So then we call the API, we call login. When that succeeds, so we're not doing any error checking here, and obviously when we start running tests, we'll be writing a lot more error checking. So then we fetch the available instruments, we come back with an array of instruments, we create a router, so I'll actually show you what the router does in fairly soon. And then we create the instrument list, and that's what you're seeing there. And then we start polling. Every second we poll for new rates, and all the polling is doing is updating the model. It's not telling the view to do anything. But if we look in the view, can you bring up the view code? So the instrument list view, what we've done in the view is, instrument item view. Item view? Instrument item view. What we've done in the view is we said, whenever the model changes, re-render this view. So we don't have to tell it to do it. We just change the model and it does it. Oh, yeah. Fat arrow, fat arrow, fat arrow. So the reason that you want the fat arrow there is so that this is the right one when the listen to happens. Otherwise, it becomes the event handler this. So try clicking on it, see if it comes up. So we created a little router. And the router just shows this details view, which has a little bit more information about the instrument.
The bit of nugget there is, so the router is pretty much the thing that's going to analyze your URL and pretend that you're only serving one HTML page, but by tapping into the push state API, it lets you manipulate what you've got in the URL and pretend that you've logically changed page, but really you haven't gone to the server. You still everything is still running on the client side. So the bit of nugget is when you click on this, you want to just change the URL and let the router handle like what would happen if this was the URL that you had loaded initially.
So the idea what Jerome was talking about is if somebody had bookmarked this, and when they reload the page, you don't want them to have to go through a different code path. Just let the router take care of all that, and then only one code path to debug and maintain.
And it worked.
Robust. It's not robust code.
And
we
then
just wrote it an hour ago.
Yeah. And then, so you want to, in the URL, you want to get enough data that you can restore, like which page it was and what data it was. So here we're saving the pair, Aussie dollars against Canadian dollar. so we can show like that pair. If this was missing, we would have the details here, but no data inside.
So I think there's one last commit we have left, which is where we added some styling using Sass. Or is that 15? Okay. You have to restart again. New file. So we wanted to use a CSS preprocessor. We didn't really have a strong opinion on either one. Yeoman came pre-configured with Sass, so we ended up using Sass. So far, it's done as well. So there's not a whole lot of rates after 4:30. So that's why it's not flashing a lot. But if we had this running during the day, every second you'd see lots of red and green happening. You can shrink that. Command minus. So anyway, that's about as, talk about Sass a little bit. So that's all the code that we've had prepared. We have a few more slides talking about some of the tools, or if anybody has any questions they want to ask or areas they want us to concentrate on, we're happy to take direction. Okay.
So really, as Mark said, like, Sass extends CSS, and you could pick less, you could be stylist. They pretty much do the same thing. They bring you variables so that one area where it's used, well, they bring you variables, nested rules, mixins, and many other things. And we really wanted to show this slide because really CSS is it's kind of yeah, it should work, but damn it, oh, come on, So here's the file. One thing where it's useful, for example, is one thing where the variables are useful is for colors. If you want to give some context to the color and you don't have, so there's two ways. You could either name the variable as what the color is, so that could be light gray, or you could describe it in terms of what it's going to be used for. Here it's going to be used as the background. It's a philosophical question.
Well, I mean, so if your designer comes to you just before you're releasing the code and she says, you know, this green isn't green enough. It needs to be, the rising color needs to be a little more greener. And if you called it light green here, and then you're going to call it lighter green, you have to go through all your code everywhere and change it. But if you have like a rising color, then you can just change what it is there. So we had a couple discussions about which way we prefer. But since I'm the team lead, I got to dictate.
So that was variables and so nesting in action, for example, here. So list view is the container of everything, and for each li, so I'm going to pretty much write a rule like this, and I'm going to give it a couple of things. So I'll show you what the code looks like.
What are you looking for? Since it's updating, it's going to keep scrolling away from it.
This ULI on one line. What else was? Oh, okay. So another place, and I guess so. This is one place where preprocessors like Sass, Stylus, Less will maybe not give you in the right track. So it seems like a useful feature, but if you abuse it, you're going to end up with like super specific rules like list, li, the span, the fifth span under the div that's under there, and it doesn't really become very modular. The couple of best practices we've read about actually advertise the opposite, where you only have classes and you use as many little levels of
less indentation.
And then one place where mixins are useful is, for example, the animation property, with which I'm like changing the background, because it's still vendor specific. Every time you want to use animation, you would have to specify all the combinations possible to make sure it works. So the mixin is pretty much a function that lets you say, hey, I'm going to use the animation mixin, and all those rules are going to be applied for you everywhere you use it. And you use it by saying include and the name of the mixin. So I named it the same, animation, and I want to trigger the up animation every time the code gets flagged with the rising class, and it's going to last for 9 seconds.
No, a ninth.
A ninth of the second.
9/10 of a second.
And with animation, usually you pair it with a keyframe. Again, that's vendor specific, so the mixin helps you say, hey, like, if they ever all agree, this is the one rule that's going to be used, but this is for Opera, this is for Microsoft, Mozilla, and WebKit.
So a little secret as to why we use a ninth of a second. We're polling every second, so it has time to fade away before it's going to change again.
And then it pretty much looks like this, where you say, so here I'm saying, at the beginning of my animation, I go to the full color, and then I'm going to slowly fade away to the natural color, which was this one, the background gray. But you can use you can use percentage to define different steps. So 50%, 25, anything. And that's pretty much what Sass give you.
So this is what our app looked like at the end of a week. You want to show them what it looks like now? I have it still running. So the nice thing about, since this is all just a web page, it's all just running off my laptop, and we can serve it locally, and we don't have to get through firewalls or anything to show you what it looks like. We can all just run it here. Right. So if you notice, actually, one of the things that you notice is happening there is because we're trying to be responsive. You noticed what's the word I'm looking for? Selector. Sorry? No. Where it detects your width. Damn it, the words are failing me. Media query. Yes, thank you. So you notice, so that we just switched from, go back. So you just saw it switch from the mobile version to the desktop version, and then, to the tablet version to the desktop version. Right. And really small screen. Yeah. So this will be more apparent when he actually logs in. So this is the desktop view. These are the rates. So it looks a little better than what we just showed you after a week. And then, so this is the tablet view. Oh, that's the tablet landscape view, and then this is the tablet portrait.
The trade panel shows up, and then no more space for the trade panel. And if we really squish, then...
So there wasn't space in the middle, so the stuff went underneath. And that's... Yeah. And then... So this is a list of open trades, and there's a bugs. Yeah. Reload the page. It'll go away. It's a feature. Hey. The question is, did we use any UI frameworks? No, we just used Backbone, but nothing on top of that. So our goal is to run on the mobile devices and desktops equally well. So we looked at some frameworks, and they work here well, but they don't work there, and they work here, and they don't work there. So we didn't really find anything that met all our needs.
But we're open to discussion, if you know it.
Cool, so that's pretty much everything. Yes? So we had, at the end of 4 months, when our first set of co-ops left, we had all of the primary functionality working. That was the end of April. We can actually probably check out a branch from that. So Jerome's going to take a look for it and see if he can find it. We can show you what it looked like then. Then our designer joined, and everything changed. So we didn't add any new functionality. We haven't added any new functionality really for the last 4 months. It's all been design, but it looks a million times better than it ever did. So the first 4 months was functionality. The last 4 months have been look. And the next 2 weeks are going to be bug fixing, and then we're hoping to release it just after Labor Day. Okay.
So you were talking about your Android and iOS apps, social media, or you could outside.
So we have, the question is, Android and iOS apps, are they native? Yes, they are currently native. This is not meant to replace them, so we're not going to be doing a phone gap app. This is meant to work alongside them. And as much as I love HTML, native apps still run faster, run a little better in some situations. And that will probably always be the case. So this is meant to work beside them and meant to be, so this will work on BlackBerry. We don't have a native BlackBerry app. This will work on Windows 8 phone. We don't have a Windows 8 phone. This will work on your TV. This will work on, it'll probably work on the Firefox phone that just got released. We've ordered one, but we haven't had a chance to try it yet. So that's really what it's meant for. New devices as they come out and to work alongside the native ones. But we're never going to get rid of our native apps. Are you able to find it? Sorry? Oh. Any other questions? So we have every 3 months or so we have a hack day where people can work on whatever they want. And we have prizes for the most fun hack, the most marketable hack, the most outside the box hack. And this was our co-ops. Our co-ops took what we had and skinned it to look like Pokemon. And really, all they did to do that was change some CSS and some HTML, but the rest of the code is all there. It took them, inside 24 hours, they made it look like that. So, that was right at the end of April, April 24th. So this is what it really looked like at that time. I think the FX Kids one looked better, actually. Oh, you still got it. All right. While he's doing that, anybody else have any questions? Yes? Daniel, did you have any experience with BDD before you started with us?
Not at all. It was very intuitive just because BDD is all about making it legible for the test and everything. Again, behavior. So, can you describe it?
You didn't know you'd be put on the spot.
Yeah. When you describe all the tests, as he showed you in the test files, again, like when I first came in, I would just sometimes just go into there, read some of the stuff that was there just to figure out exactly what's going on with the app, what classes I'm looking at and what they do. So in that sense, it was really easy for me to pick up. And then when you actually start doing it yourself, it's actually not that bad.
So Daniel actually had a bit of a disadvantage. He was on another team for the first 2 months of his co-op project, and then his team lead left on paternity leave. So he had nothing to do. So he's like, I want to work in HTML. We said, sure, come on over. So he didn't even have that same handholding that our other co-ops did for the first couple of weeks. But he picked it up quite well. Right, so we have some other slides that are not near as well prepared. We can go through them if you want, or we can just do more questions, or we can just end it, and it's up to you guys. Yes? So we don't have any sort of integration tests. We just have basically unit tests. So we don't really have any, other than we have a device lab. Can you show me a picture of the device lab? We have a device lab where we have a bunch of different devices and we go in and try things there. But we don't really have a formalized process right now. It's something that we've wanted to do. But as we said right at the beginning, if you don't do it right away, you're not going to end up doing it.
So it looked like this initially, a bunch of device, a big mess. Every time you wanted to find something, it was a bit hard. So I got pissed off and I took a piece of paper and a pen. And as a social experiment, I drew the outline of each device and labeled it properly and just waited a week to see if people would put it back in the right place or if it just becomes still a mess. And there was an actual emerging behavior that appeared. People starting putting the names on the post-its and put that when they checked out an item. So that was pretty good.
So the other thing that we found very useful was the remote remote debugging that is very easy with Chrome and iOS apps, or not Chrome, Safari and iOS devices, and almost as easy with Android and Chrome. And there are tools like Winery or whatever it's called that help with Windows and IE and stuff like that. So we found these tools helped a lot too. Winery. Did that answer your question? Cool. Anybody else? Yes. So we actually use handlebars for templates. We had intended to do that as well, but we just ran out of time preparing the slides. So we have some slides here for handlebars. Yeah. So. Okay, I haven't used Haml, so I have zero experience or knowledge about it. So in a previous project, I used the underscore templating framework, and I found handlebars easier to use. The nice thing about handlebars is you can pre-compile your templates into JavaScript files and just serve them up that way. Sorry, I'm standing in front of the code. And serve them up that way, and then it runs a little faster at runtime. It doesn't have to actually do the compiling then.
Portion of the library, you just ship the runtime. I think it's all, with Mustache, they're both logicless. So they assume that by the time you're going to render your templates, you figure out, you must hash your data into the proper way so that you don't have to do any code in your template. I mean, you're using a templating engine to avoid mixing code markup in your code. So the last thing you want to do is put code in your markup, and it really helps this way.
Yes. So the question was why Backbone versus some other options for an MVC. To be honest, it's the only one that I've personally used. I like that it's lightweight. It does a couple things really well, but it doesn't try to do everything. I've played with Angular a little bit. Not enough to really get in depth, but it kind of scares me a little bit that I modify something over here and something over here changes, and I don't understand why. And in something where we've got 80 rates on the screen, and they're updating, every second. I don't know how performant it's going to be. I haven't done any tests to see if it will be, but I know that Backbone will meet those requirements. But no, I haven't really looked into any of the other tools. So, one of the new members on our team is a huge fan of Angular, so he's convinced me to take a look at Angular. I may try it for a new project, but we won't be changing on this one. There's a really cool website called To Do MVC, where they basically compare a whole bunch of them. So I encourage anybody who's trying to decide on what MVC framework to use to look at something like that and pick the one that best suits their style. For this project, Backbone seemed to be the best choice, but for another project, I would probably check out some of the other ones before I made up my mind.
The one thing that Backbone may be missing out of the box compared to Angular is data binding. So if you put data in your forms, getting this data into your model automatically. The reason it's not so important for us is that we're targeting mobile device in the first place. So in our app, there's not a lot of places where you're going to type numbers pretty much when you place a trade. And we want to avoid as much as possible to make you type. We'd rather you swipe, move stuff, but not actually type on your keyboard. So the fact that it didn't came with a data binding library was not a big deal. But there are extensions you can add to that. And then I guess the one thing that Backbone had suggested that we didn't do for the API part is the models, they come with some methods like fetch, save that are supposed to be like the create, read, update, delete part and map to the same endpoints on your backend. We just felt that, yes, it's built in, but if we went this way, it means all our code that's fetching data would be spread around multiple models. And because we had to switch to another API in the middle of the project, having all the code centralized in one place allowed us to swap one file out and not touch any of the models. So that's the one part, like the one feature of Backbone we didn't use, and it turned out to be good.
Yes? So the question is, can I touch on Jenkins and how it relates to GitHub and the workflow? So Jenkins is a continuous integration server. It scans your code repository every couple of minutes to see if there's any changes, and if there are any changes, it runs whatever tasks you define. Our tasks are to check out the code, compile the tests, and if the tests all pass, build a Debian package for installing on our servers later. So we have all of our products get packaged up as Debian packages so that we can, to make for easy installing and dependency management and all that. Right. So, sorry, does that answer? Is there another part of it you wanted me to go into more details on? So we don't use GitHub. We have a server, we have a machine where we're running Git, but it's not GitHub. We call it GitHub, but it's not really GitHub. And the Jenkins server just has access to it and just scans its directory every few minutes.
We use a distributed code version control system in a centralized way. We just said this particular repo is important, is special, it's authoritative. This is where everybody's pushed their code afterwards.
No, we are actually switching to GitHub Enterprise in the new year. So that will change our workflow somewhat. But for now, we just have our own server where we run Git.
Something I'm really passionate about, because the way it's set up currently, we have an integration team and an ops team that stop and test things before it goes out, and they can add delay. And one thing that I particularly wanted to try with this project is convince them that continuous deployment would be a good thing. As Joel Spolsky said, any code that's sitting in your repo is pretty much software inventory. You fix something, but there's somebody out there that's stripping on this bug right now because it doesn't ship. And yeah, so the idea is that to do it right, you need a test suite. And I've been into another web team that had an inconsistent web team, so you can't really do this. So yeah, the idea is you run the test suite on every commit. If it's successful, you package your application, then you deploy it to production, and then the final thing is you monitor the trends, the changes in your trends. The changes in trend in key metrics, like how many people log in, how many people trade, to see if it's good or not, and roll back automatically if you have to. And again, because we haven't shipped yet, we did this internally. So we deploy, but internally, at least our product manager and project manager can see this in almost real time.
So Jerome was recently working on another team where they didn't do this early on, and when it came time to release, the release got delayed by a few weeks because it took time to get up to speed. The project I was on previous to this, we started doing this early on, and when it came time to release, it happened real fast. When this project's ready to release, we'll be able to push a button and it'll be released. There will be no delay because we did this all right from the beginning.
Week one, we had one basic web page package, but at least if anybody asked, we could send them to production. The good thing about an HTML single page app is you're shipping pretty much one HTML page, one JavaScript file, one CSS file, and a couple optimized images. So chances are, if you have a web server running around, like your company web server, you're pretty much ready to ship this. You're right.
Cool. Any more questions?
Cool. So thank you, guys.